Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Stencil Month for 2024. Today, I'm going to be creating 3 cards, and really only one of the cards uses a stencil. The other 2 cards came about because I just wanted to experiment and play with the Simon Hurley Solar Paste. So I'm going to start out by showing you all the different colors of Solar Paste. There are 6 colors in the Solar Paste line, I think. I mean, these are a little bit of a different kind of paste. They've been out for a bit, but these are pastes that have a very, very pale look to them. They don't have much color. And then when you apply them over a dark surface, depending on the thickness of the paste, that will determine how much color comes through. It's a really interesting medium. I don't know that I've ever played with anything that's quite like this. The only thing that I could kind of compare it to is maybe some duochrome iridescent watercolor paints that I've used in the past. Colors that don't really show up unless they're on a dark surface. If they're on a lighter surface, you don't really get much color, but when they are on a dark surface, it's like they start to glow. So since it's a stencil month, I started out with a stencil. This is the Spring Boho stencil from Simon Says Stamp. Just happens to be a stencil that I designed. I really love this kind of circular radiating pattern. I applied some Pixie spray on the back of the stencil and let that dry. And basically that just gives it a sticky surface so that it will stick to my paper and I don't have to worry about any of the paste kind of leaking underneath areas of the stencil where I don't want it. Started out with the purple shade. I don't recall the name. I will have the specific shades of the solar paste that I used today listed down in the supplies. I'll actually list all of the colors, but I will call out the colors that I use specifically because I think I used 4 or 5 of the colors. I did not use one of them. I can't remember which I didn't use, but for the application on the stencil, I used small amounts of each color and kind of mix them on top of the stencil. Before going into each jar, I cleaned off my palette knife to make sure I wasn't mixing colors or contaminating the colors inside each jar. And at this point, I wasn't entirely sure how much color would show up on this particular project because the thickness of the paste was determined a little bit by the thickness of the stencil because I was scraping the paste right off of the stencil. So obviously the amount of paste that is applied can't be any thinner than the thickness of the stencil. So I peeled that up and I was so glad I used Pixie spray. Made for a really, really clean application. Look at those precise lines. I love how sharp that turned out. At this point, I thought, I really just want to play with it. I'm going to do something similar to what I did during my live stream a few weeks ago when I played with the lunar paste. The lunar paste, which are neon, show up on dark surfaces as well. And I thought, I wonder if I could get a really cool effect by scraping this with my palette knife over the black cardstock and sort of getting these almost like scraped curling ribbon textures, very similar to painting with a thicker acrylic paint with a palette knife. So I thought this was just a really cool effect. I loved the sort of squiggles and scrapes that I could get with each one of these paste colors. And as they're overlapped, they kind of give this really cool effect. You can kind of see the color glowing from underneath. I just thought it looked so neat. And this really made me think of sometimes people paint pictures with a palette knife or very, very thick application of paint onto a canvas. And I thought, I wonder if I could paint with these pastes and create flowers. So after I finished this second example for my kind of paste backgrounds I'm doing today, I decided to try painting flowers with the paste. Started out with just my fingertips, which if you know me, this was a sacrifice. I hate having anything on my hands. I just don't like them to get super dirty. I don't mind it. I can wash my hands, but I try to avoid it. And then I eventually went to just the palette knife. I went back to the palette knife because I realized I could get sharper edges using something plastic like this palette knife. So this flower, I thought, I'll just make it really simple, kind of like a little daisy with those petals coming into the center. Really, I was just experimenting, seeing what I could do painting with a palette knife. And I actually do have a couple different palette knives, ones that have more of a sharp point, which would probably have done an even better job than this palette knife I'm using now. But really, I was just experimenting and playing with the solar paste to kind of see what I could do, see what I could create with the different paste colors. This next one, I have no idea what I was doing. I was just really just kind of trying to get kind of like a circular petal application. Now, after the fact, I don't know if my phone was listening to what I was doing or saying or something, but I keep getting these Instagram reels that show people painting flowers with a palette knife or painting flowers on top of a cake with buttercream, which is a very similar kind of style. But now I'm seeing all these other examples of how people paint with thicker mediums like a paste or a buttercream or paint. And now I just want to play with this paste and see what I could do, even if I was applying it to a larger surface. I think it just looks really cool. Now, this third flower was my favorite of all three that I created. And I started doing just kind of this swirling kind of application. And then I thought, what if there was just a big petal right on the front of this flower, almost making kind of like a rose. So a more flat petal, making up the front of this, and then kind of building up the front. So I sort of built the top edges of the petals and then came in and scraped on this front petal that's a little more flat, if that makes sense. And it really looks like one of those delicate flowers kind of opening up, like the bud of a rose. I really loved how that turned out. Completely accidental. Don't make me repeat it. I don't think I could. And then I grabbed the more green solar paste and brought it in on my palette knife and did more elongated shapes, trying to get some really, really long leaves. And it's kind of like you paint with the edge of the palette knife and then smush it down to one side so that one side is scraped more than the other. It's the difference in the thickness of the paste that give it the variation in color. The thicker areas have more paste, and therefore the color doesn't come through quite as much. I really love the very organic edges that I was able to get with these leaves. I think they just turned out so cool. So after I did the leaves, then I came back and added just a little center on this sort of daisy shape. I kind of messed with the petals a little bit after the fact too, started moving them around a little bit. And then I decided, don't mess with it too much. Time to walk away. Because I knew if I kept kind of messing with it, it would probably make it even more and more messy. So I decided to walk away. To finish off the flowers, I used a white gel pen and I kind of did kind of like a flicking motion with my white gel pen. I wanted to have a very organic line. I didn't want it to look absolutely perfect. And after the fact, as I'm editing the footage from when I made this card, I'm realizing that I forgot to bring the stem from the yellow flower all the way to the bottom. So there's no stem on the bottom part. Maybe it's directly behind the pink flower. We don't know. So this is what it looks like before it's dry. This is right after I've applied the paste, and it looks really, really neat. I love how that turns out, but it actually shows even a little bit more color once everything has dried. So I let these dry overnight, and here is what they look like when everything is dry. Now, the stencil one was actually dry within about 30 minutes. It had such a thin application of the paste that it was ready to go fairly quickly. These other two examples, however, had very thick sections on them, and they did need to dry overnight or for many hours. So this is the next day. It's probably about 12 hours later, and all of the paste is dry. I'm sure it probably dried a lot sooner than 12 hours later, but this is just when I came back to finish them off. So here's how they look. I love how you can see as I kind of bend this in the light that there's a color shift of all the colors, especially when they're applied a little bit more thinly. I think it looks really, really neat. So I trimmed these down so they were slightly smaller than an A2 card front, and I adhered them using a little bit of foam adhesive. And then I used the Bold Smiles stamp set and coordinating dies from Simon Says Stamp to create some greetings to go on the front of these cards. I used that same black cardstock, which, by the way, was pitch black from Hero Arts. I applied a bunch of anti-static powder for some heat embossing, and then I stamped the greetings in white pigment ink from Simon Says Stamp. And I stamped that just once and then applied white embossing powder over the top. This embossing powder specifically is alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. So I sprinkled that on and tapped off the excess. And then I used my heat tool to heat up the powder until it was smooth and melted. Now there's a lot of that anti-static powder hanging around. So then I came in with a microfiber cloth and really buffed that off. You have to use quite a bit of pressure to really pick up as much of that powder as possible. And since I was going to be die cutting these out, I didn't worry about any of the powder really showing. I used the coordinating dies to cut out each one of these greetings. And then I put some little tiny foam squares on the back of each greeting and placed them onto the card fronts. I liked these greetings in particular for these card designs because they're still substantial. They're a little bit larger than a small greeting, but still small enough that it doesn't, cover up all of the pretty color from that paste. So here are the finished cards. These actually worked up very, very quickly, especially when you consider that I did all three of those. All three cards, probably in a combination of about an hour when you don't count the drying time. So these worked out really, really well. You can check out everything I've used today, including the solar paste, the stencil, and my stamp and dies listed down below in the supplies section. You can see that supply list at the YouTube video or over at my blog. And I will be back on Friday with day 3 of Stencil Month. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you in another video very soon.